Welcome everybody to episode 5 of Boarderline Genius, our game design podcast. Second episode that we've had the name, which is pretty cool. By way of introduction, for those of you joining for the first time, my name is Andrew. I'm an Australian-based game designer who's created these games. Footy Feud, pretty basic kind of take-that games that are officially licensed by our Australian Football League. But probably the big one that is upcoming in September is an officially licensed Marvel IP that are beginning to kind of market and get the word out there for a September launch. But great to have on the show today Curtis Humphreys, who has a live Kickstarter at the moment, also fellow Australian-based game designer. So yeah, looking forward to uncovering a bit more about his journey, his Kickstarter at the moment. And yeah, I'm sure we'll have a good chat and hopefully uncover quite a few good insights over the next kind of 40-45 minutes. So yeah, thanks Curtis for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
All good, mate. We're just kind of chatting, I guess, off air before, and I think a good place to start with these ones is you're a busy guy. How did you get into game design in the first place and take the plunge into, I guess, trying to commercialize this hobby and passion that you have?
Yeah, well, look, honestly, I don't know if it started out with commercialization. I've got a couple different things that I do entrepreneurially outside of my day-to-day job, and I actually think it starts with just getting involved with a passion. Like I've just found something that I enjoyed. So gaming has been something I've been doing for a while. I'm part of a church group, and every time we, like have a church camp or a get together and we're somewhere and it's late at night, we'll generally play board games. We don't drink alcohol, so it's the next best thing, right?
Absolutely.
So
that makes two of us actually.
There you go. Nice.
Yeah.
So we'll play some board games, and I think what triggered me to start my first game was actually I was playing a game I quite like called Bang. I don't know if you've played it before. And it's like a cowboy kind of game, and it's kind of a mix of werewolves where you've got the characters that you don't know who they are, and teams, you kind of hidden teams, but it's done really well in this card game format. The problem is you can get out in the first round, but the game could take an hour. If you're out early, you're done. And I got out early and I was done. So I was sitting off to the side and I was like, I like the game, but this is frustrating. So I just started just playing around. There were some poker chips lying around and some cards. And I just started kind of just not even really with it thinking, but building this mechanic. And then I was like, oh, this is an interesting mechanic. And from that, and over the period of, a couple of months, I just started in my spare time just working a bit more on the mechanics and how it could work, and just with the standard deck of cards. And building it out from there, and then started playing with some friends and testing. I was like, you know what, this could be a game. And never really even at that time thought I'm going to become a publisher or a creator. It really crossed my mind. Until I'd been on Kickstarter and seen it and thought, you know what, maybe I could make this a game. I just didn't. So I found someone who could do the artwork, and I said, look, I did everything on the L cheap. I said, he was at uni, and I was like, well, why don't we partner up? I'll be a great referee for you. This would be like a really good project for you to be able to say, this is the work I've done. We'll get it like as part of your uni degree, so you can get credit for your work that you're doing. And then we'll do a profit like split at the end. So, then we agreed on a profit split, and he was like, no worries. So with that in mind, we worked together, and then we developed the first game that I came out with, which we kickstarted, and we kickstarted that 2 years ago. And I went in that pretty blind, and I think we funded. I think I made about $3,000. It was it was a low target, but funded, and that's now out and been released. So that was kind of where it started.
That's awesome. And what's the game? Tell us more about it.
Yeah, so the game, actually, I should have prepared something earlier. You can cut this part. So the game is it's called Rider. Actually, I'm gonna. It's just a deck. It's just a deck essentially. There's nothing more to it than cards, but there's 85 cards in the deck, and it has a bit of there was some strong elements I wanted to feature in it. So first of all, I didn't want people to be able to get out of the game.
Yeah.
But you still needed there to be a clear winner and an objective. I also wanted it not to rely on luck. Like just you draw a bad card and you feel like you're out and done. You need to be able to kind of almost win from any point. But I guess the key point of that was I didn't want somebody new coming into the game and first time just winning because, without knowing what they're doing. So it had to be built around strategy. So they were the kind of core elements, couldn't get out, and strong amount of strategy. And so it's kind of like a battlefield type game. You've got your hidden cards and no one can see them. And so it's a big mix of strategy and memory, but I won't go on about that for time. It's quite unique in the way it works, but I'm sure there's mechanics of it in every game, right? It was what I came up with when I got out of Bang. So and it was a good starter. What is also interesting about it, and people won't know this about the one I've got at the moment on Kickstarter, Go RPG. So Rider, there's 8 legend cards in Rider, and you play as one of those legends. Each one of those legends has an origin story, which you can read, and essentially they've all been pulled from other worlds and to fight this battle against each other. But what people don't know is that I've got a series of games lined up, and each of them are actually, I don't talk about it in either of them, but each of those games are one of the leaders of the legends backstories. Yeah. So in like one of their worlds. So this one I built here is the legend Jordan. It's her, she's the queen, and it's kind of it's her realm. But it's got nothing to do with the Rider game, but it's just they're just linked origin stories. Yeah. So bit of fun in the background.
Kind of the Rider gaming universe is kind of the overall framework for how everything can thematically tie in with each other.
Yeah, it's I think if I get through all 8 different games or iterations or whatever, it'll be interesting. It's kind of almost an Easter egg. It just sits in the background. And when you play this game and you've played the other games, you'll be like, oh, that's their world. So it kind of gives you a taste because they're all very different worlds. So
Absolutely. I think for me, the really clear takeout there is like, it really started with an insight. Like you played this game that went for an hour and you went out straight away. It's like, this really sucks. Like it really sucks. Like there is a clear barrier here or a clear objective that I'm trying to achieve. And then secondary to that, like your principle was you want there to be some strategy involved, and you would have done the balance and the play testing between where on that spectrum ultimately it landed to be easy enough to pick up and play, but then some degree of skill to win. But I think just like having those core principles in mind that set up your design journey, even as a first timer, would have given you a really good compass to then know for actually like what you're shooting for, what does good look like. And then I'd imagine like how you'd hold yourself accountable to that, like through play testing and through seeing the various iterations.
For sure. And particularly when you're, if you're using cards or dice, the elements of luck are quite hard to avoid. So, which in itself created a fun challenge for me. So, but it's you need to have that foundation before you head into it for sure.
Absolutely. And I guess you funded the first one, $3,000, as you said. Like I'm noted a whole heap of learnings from that, and now you've got a new Kickstarter out that's again successfully funded, $9,000. I know that we're chatting before about you've just taken so many different test and learns and so many different areas that just to see what works essentially, right? So really keen to understand. I haven't done a crowdfunder before. Crowdfunding is an enormously popular way of getting games out there and building an audience and ultimately getting funding. So really keen to understand more about why Kickstarter and how you found the process.
Yeah, so to give a bit more background, and so I've been listening. I just podcast nonstop, for a long time. But particularly to figure out or find out and finesse as much as I could about the Kickstarter algorithm. That was kind of really my goal. I have like a data analytics background and coding as well. And so those things, I find quite interesting. And I also, I worked in the field of SEO for 2 years as well. So algorithms, I get them generally, and I know that they're all hidden and all of those things. So one thing I did on my first campaign, I was like, I need $3,000 to be able to like print and manufacture this to have a certain amount of leftover units. And so I set my funding goal for about $3,000. What that meant was at the start, at like day one, I got like, a couple $100. I got maybe $1,000. And then so it went up and then to where my target was. And then for the rest of the campaign, it was struggle down all the way. It was a 30-day campaign. Okay. And by like the last, maybe, I think I hit it with 5 days to go, just trickled over the line. And then once I hit it, I actually found I got a bunch more come in. And so, if there's two things, if there's only two things that you consider when launching a Kickstarter or any, because I'm sure it's the same on GameFound. I didn't do it this time, but I'm considering it for a future project. The first is your goal. Your goal should be the smallest possible that you need to manufacture, even if it's just a local manufacturer. So I set my goal for this campaign to $500 because I was like, you know what, if I get 10 sales, and that's going to get me $500 because it's $50 per unit, and I can manufacture that locally and I can ship that, and it will cost me about $500. And I've got the game and it's done. Won't make any profit and it'll be kind of a failure. But I knew that 500 was the absolute bare minimum. And so I set it to 500. And then what I did from there was just ensure that I had enough crowd to get $500 worth of funding day one. It actually within the first hour or 2 hours, 2 hours was actually my goal, of the campaign going live. And that meant like local network for sure. It's only $500, so it's not a lot. And Facebook ads. So I spent a total of $120 on Facebook ads for this. That was my whole marketing, because I actually just wanted to test to see if this would work. And I didn't want to invest thousands of dollars because I know I've got a marketing background. I know that I could spend thousands and but actually all of my entrepreneurial projects, I like to do them at bare minimum, like at no cost. And so 120 was basically what I had left over from the writer campaign, from a profit perspective. So I was just reinvest and very targeted, specific, all US based ad campaign. And so the first part of the strategy was get it funded straight away. That was, and I knew that would help with the kickstarting thing. And the second part of the algorithm was continuous funding, even if it was $1.
Okay. Yeah.
So I had to consider how could I get backers that would, because the algorithm, particularly in the middle, and I'm actually in the middle of the campaign at the moment. One thing I've found is there's a real big slump in terms of Kickstarter pushing you out to people. As soon as I hit that 500, I got lots of people coming from all different places I didn't really know about, and I was really, really good, and it went up quite big. But then from about the day where there was about 18 days left in the campaign, it's really started to drop off.
Sure.
And that was kind of expected. And it's kind of expected to do that until probably about 10 days left. And I'm expecting that. So it's what you do in that lull. And so I've had people backed up to just put $1 on my campaign, just friends and family. Just put $1 on my campaign. That's it. And I also have PMP pledges, which are a very crucial part of any campaign. So print and play pledges, because they're just the little bits, and they're pure profit because you're just sending a PDF. But more importantly, they're telling the algorithm people are still engaged. So it's the engagement over time that you need, and you need to hit your target within the first hour or two, at very least the first day. Now, what some people do, and I've seen on there, is they set a really low target, like they set like $1. But what I'd found through researching other campaigns is that it actually doesn't work. You need to have like a decent chunk. So $500 is probably even still too low. If I had, I probably should have done about $1,000, but it still has worked quite effectively because of all the other stuff. But whatever it is, there's definitely a minimum or like a spot to hit, and I would say it's probably around the $1,000 mark. You probably don't want to go lower than that, or lower than 500 for sure not. They're probably the two main takeaways that I got from the research that I've done.
Fantastic. And I'm even even kind of before we go onto the Kickstarter algorithms and such, even keen to kind of understand a bit more about the $120 of Facebook ads and targeting the US in particular, like help the audience and myself as well for that matter kind of understand like, well, what was your strategy with that 120? Like, certainly targeting the US was one part that I'd love to dive into, but even like the consistency or the almost like monotony of running the same ad consistently across a duration, or test and learn with different things. You're really keen to understand how you try to optimize the best use of writer's profit.
Yeah, for sure. So so the reason I targeted the US, first of all, is there's a lot more local print companies there than there is in Australia. So there's probably only a handful of quality card printing companies in Australia.
Yeah,
all of them are twice the price you'll pay, like literally in the US, and 10 times the price you'll pay manufacturing in China.
Yeah.
And some of them are better than others quality wise. The US, more people, they just have a bigger. So if I got the majority of people from the US, I knew that I could actually print and ship, because the shipping is super, super cheap within the US compared to even Australia. So I knew that I could ship and print and ship for much cheaper over there, and easily within that $500.
Yeah.
So that was probably the main thing in terms of targeting. Obviously, there's the standard stuff in setting, like you've got an audience of a couple 100 million people, so you want to be quite like harsh in terms of it. And from the research I'd done, the clicks and the conversions were predominantly happening with males around the age of 35. So I set a very targeted span on that. I set all of the gaming, like a huge list of tabletop games, D&D, Pathfinder, RPG, huge list of all of those things as well.
Yeah.
So they're the usual, and then you can actually play with how you distribute it, and so you can make it so it only goes to one person a certain amount of times. So it's amount of impressions per person, so you're not oversaturating, but actually it's doing more than that. You're spreading out the touch points, and if you've got something that they like, then you shouldn't have to show up to them more than 5 times. And you will have to show it at least 5 times, let's say, because people never pick things up the first, second, or third time.
Yeah.
So from a marketing perspective, don't go, I'll just show it to them once or twice, because they won't see it until probably start to see it like the 5th time. So ever seen those Facebook like things you get saying, hey, did you see this ad this week? And you're like,
yeah.
You can set unique amount of impressions to individuals, which is going to really spread the amount of awareness it goes, rather than one person getting it 20. Because if you let that go, someone on average, I think people see it like 30 times. So you're actually like tripling your eyeballs. So marketing tip.
Yeah, as you say. But then like that rule of 5, right, as well, that kind of what's the sweet spot between the frequency of impressions and the number of people, and kind of play those numbers to where you think the sweet spot will be relative to your target, which again, like a really strategic approach for how you've done it.
Yeah, it was the plan.
Oh, absolutely. And I think from my key reflections and even learnings through that as well, is it's not just the audience size of where you think the demand will come from, but also the supply side of the equation as well. So that shipping's cheaper, manufacturing's cheaper over there relative to Australia. So you get a double windfall on both supply and demand through targeting that market. Makes a lot of sense.
Totally. And you know what? As designers, we always start with design. Actually, you need to start with supply. Like if you've got to the end of your design and you haven't spoken to a manufacturer, you're going to be in for a rude shock when you realize that they need CMYK for printing, and you need to simplify your colors, and your box that you can't fit all of those components in a shipping, size or weight. You've actually just gone over, so it's cost you an extra 30% of every shipping. So you actually, as hard as it is, as you need to start with, okay, what do I actually want to ship? What are the weights? What's the constraints that I have in terms of production and shipping? Great. Okay, this is the framework. That's because if you do it the other way around, it's just so messy later.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on that, how did you find we're both based in Australia, you're based in Adelaide. Like, how did you find even meeting, connecting with various US suppliers and ultimately narrowing it down to a list that you procured through Ryder and you also procured this time around as well?
Yeah, so Ryder I actually did through ePrint in Brisbane. So I kept that local. I didn't really
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
I didn't even really have any idea what I was doing. But I had a ballpark in terms of how much I would need for production, and that was kind of it. This one, well, I set my goal for $500, and I knew at the $500 mark, I didn't need to look for a supplier because I could just get them printed off the shelf, like at any, get like 100 units or 50 units or whatever for that amount and ship what I need across. And then if I've got some left over, if it's too expensive for shipping, I'll just burn them there or whatever. I knew I could cover it.
Yeah.
But the thing was with this one was I actually, whilst I had a goal of 500, I had a hidden goal, like an expectation and an objective of $5,000, because $5,000 was where my manufacturing cost without shipping sat. So that was, I didn't do any research in terms of America. I purely did my diligence in China. And I actually, I did a bit of research, and you start a Kickstarter, you're going to get about 30 people hit you up and go, hey, we can do it, from all over the world, predominantly China.
Yeah.
And you just got to be like, oh, I'm good, thanks. You have to be so careful with like, there's so many horror stories. But I was listening to a podcast and from the Crowdfunding Nerds, and they interviewed a guy called Herschel from Hero Time 1. And he speaks about how he went around to, like, he was looking for one, he went around to 3,000. He's not native to China, but he speaks Mandarin fluently. And so I just called that company up and said, hey, can I speak to Hirsch? And got on the phone.
Why not?
Well, why not? I think people sometimes are a bit scared to, like, this person was on a podcast or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
But for sure. So I did it, had a great chat, and I've teed him up as a supplier. He's super competitive, but his quality is insane.
Fantastic.
So even his pricing is on par, but I'm very confident with the output. So I'm actually about to get my production copy soon come through. But from the work and the reviews I've seen, he's good. So it wasn't that hard, but I just, I had a chat directly. He speaks perfect English, so that helped.
Yeah, absolutely. But as you said, it's not just about the design process, it's also about the supply as well. And I think that as much as even from a funding perspective, it's not about knowing your minimum, it's knowing what your objective is. Like, your objective there was a 10x on what your minimum was, but you set the minimum very strategically to get funded to play their algorithms.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's which you've got to do. And there's really no point running 500. I mean, the other side of the coin is I decided this time, I didn't really think about it last time, but this time I made a decision that Kickstarter was not where I was going to make my profit, because of the amount of money that Kickstarter takes. So I don't think anybody should be going on to Kickstarter, because they can take up to 10%. And of the fees. So Kickstarter should be used to manufacture, and what I essentially at the $5,000 mark, I would have had about maybe 400 leftover units, sell them at $50 each. That's your profit, and you're not cutting Kickstarter into that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that was something I decided early as well. I just needed enough to manufacture, and whatever I did in Kickstarter would be only make the manufacturing, like the quality better. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, it was great kind of covering off on the US and the 120 and how to optimize that side of things. The other kind of really key insights that you shared was, I guess, the importance of funding on day one. Secondly, how to get over the middle lull period, and then how to bring it home, which hopefully your current Kickstarter can do that, because you're not quite 10 days out. But just really keen to get your tips on, I'm guessing there's probably going to be a little bit of overlap with how you did the Facebook ads, but just what were some of the strategies that you used to get that funding straight away?
Sure. So one of the things which I don't see a lot of campaigns do, and I don't understand why, but I did it as a bit of a joke on my Ryder one.
Yeah.
So, and it worked, and I had a good long laugh. So what happened was I set, so you know how you can have different pledge levels?
Yeah.
So I'm a big believer in having lots. You need to have options, right? Like you don't go into Big W and there's 5 things that you purchase. So have lots of options. They need to be different and they need to be special in their own way. But you should, at the very end, don't just have like retail packs. You need to have some fluff pieces. And so I set 2 VIP $250 pledges, and in that pledge they got 2 games instead of 1, and they got VIP status, which it doesn't really mean a lot. Like they got like priority shipping and their names on the rule book and stuff like that. They could have and they could have like a card drawn after them in the deck. Now the cost for me to do that is nothing. But what it does is really helps my shipping and my manufacturing, because I've only giving out 2 units, and then 1 additional unit. So the cost is nothing to me. The shipping is going to be about the same, but they're actually really helping support the whole campaign. So I did that, and the very first back on the campaign was that $250 pledge straight off the bat. And so my campaign
already 50% of the way there.
This was with my first one.
That's right.
Yeah. So I learned from that. I was like, oh, people will do that, and that really helped me get some initial hits. So I did the same with this one, except I'm like up the ante. So I did a 500 MIP pledge, most important, and I did 5 250 pledges. Sure. And within the first hour, I'd sold a 500 and a 250 of this one. So someone funded my campaign in 1 click.
That is incredible.
And they weren't the first people. So I'd had a couple backers, and then boom, 500 came in, and I'm just like, what?
We're there. And pop the non-alcoholic champagne.
Exactly. And but what's actually happened is those other 5 VIPs have slowly been dropping, and I didn't really expect them to sell, but I just sold another one last night, and I've actually sold 2 of them during the slump, and it's really helped because you also have people, you're going to have people cancel all the way through your campaign as well for all sorts of reasons. When you ask, it's usually financial reasons, they can't afford it. That's fine. So these 250 jumps have actually kept me either continuing to go up or just straight, but never down. So that would be a big tip, is when you do your pledges, have a couple fun pledges and give real quality value. Like this $500 pledge it's not really a fluff piece, to be honest. It's actually going to cost me a bit. It's probably going to cost me about $250 because they're getting a completely unique deck. So I need to get that custom printed separately. It's foil printed, gold plated. It's just nuts. It's valuable. But actually, they're still giving me $250 worth of additional funding that I can use as shipping and manufacturing. And more importantly, they're helping the algorithm with a huge injection of cash and another backer. So that's one really something that really helped me fund fast and stay afloat during the slump.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned before in terms of how the algorithm works, as you say, that keeping that relevance going all throughout the campaign is critically important. But you can't game your funding goal to be too low, because almost it sounds like Kickstarter has a bit of a control in place for that, so everything just doesn't fund up one another. Yeah. So kind of what's made you kind of determine that you reckon 500 to 1,000 for a startup designer essentially is, I guess, the sweet spot where your economics check out at that point, so that's a tick. But then it's still kind of playing within Kickstarter's ground rules that you can capitalize enough on the algorithm where the benefits still outweighs the risk.
Yeah, so I think what it comes down to is a little tag down the bottom that says projects we love.
Yes.
And I don't 100% know, but I haven't seen one of them on a Kickstarter that had a funding goal less than 1,000.
Okay.
And that's probably less than 1,000 US. So and this could just be from this could be a completely untrue statement, so don't take me on it. But this is just from the campaigns that I've seen. Unless that $500 campaign reached $1 million, it reached a big amount. But I have seen it on there's one that just funded today, but a botany one, It's kind of like Pandemic, but instead you're collecting flowers rather than, if you know what Pandemic is. And it's it funded for 1.5 million US with a funding goal of like low. It was like $1 or $2 grand.
Wow.
Now that's a project that they love. But you know, they would have put a huge amount of marketing spend into it and all of that. But they've played the algorithm perfectly because they're like a huge percentage to target, and they're doing pretty good. So that was essentially it for me. Was I didn't see any under, and that kind of makes sense. Like I wouldn't expect them to just unless they genuinely did like think it was an amazing game, but it hasn't been released. So I think there has to be some minimum.
Yeah. That makes complete sense. Like tack for a bit, as we kind of said before as well, like you're not a full-time game designer, you have a full-time job as I do as well. You have a number of different side projects as well. So I guess, help me and the audience understand, like, one, how do you get energy out of it? And then secondly, how do you manipulate your schedule so that this is still something that gives you energy as opposed to, just another chore on the list that maybe, just another thing to do as opposed to something fun and creative to do?
Yeah. So my wife and I were joking about this the other night with some friends because they were saying, how do you have time to do this? And I was like, well, so my youngest child, he's coming up on 2, he turns 2 in August. But he very rarely sleeps through the night. Like, I could count on hand how many times he's done it in his life. And so I've been up a lot and, in the room trying to get him back to sleep. Now I can't like look at my phone because it's too bright. So it's just me holding him or whatever in a dark room. I have nothing to do but think. So, and this could happen for hours. Like, on and off. And so it got to a point where I'd stay up because I knew he was going to wake up at 9 and then at 11 and then at 2. So I would stay up until, probably around 1 or 2. And I have a lot of additional time then to think and to plan and to just keep the brain active. And then when I was in with him and I'm trying to get him back to sleep, I would just use that time in my head just to go, hey, what if I did this? And I wonder if that mechanic would work, or this design here could be pretty cool. And so then I used that time there. So, but I think, look, it could be I'm not saying that everybody can do that. It could be a character thing that I really enjoy kind of that challenge, and that's kind of what keeps me active. Where I find an issue is once I finish doing something, if I had to come back to it, that's the part I find hard. So like I designed all the cards and someone's like, oh, you should change this one thing. I'm like, yeah, but that's on like 50 cards. And then I'm like, that's the part I find challenging, but I'm like, you're right, because then that's manufacturing. So that's the part I have to G myself up to do, and I've got to think of the long picture. But whilst I'm in the creative process, I'm just let's go. And that maybe isn't everybody, but So that was the blessing and the curse of my 2-year-old, or almost 2-year-old.
Yeah. But even now, knowing that, hopefully your 2-year-old is sleeping through the night a lot better, that, I guess, 3 to 6 hours that you had to ideate through this and think about different things like that, hopefully that time is then replaced with sleep. So, so I guess even now that maybe you do have less hours in the day, and we're out of COVID now as well, and that might mean different things for workload. I guess, how do you balance, be it on a daily routine or on a weekly routine, to know that, I guess, one, to keep a project going and make sure that the deadlines that you're setting to yourself, there's still a degree of accountability as well?
Yeah. So look, for me, I wouldn't say I have a hugely rigid calendar, but in terms of how I manage this, one thing I set out initially was that it wouldn't impact my work. But saying that, and pretty important for people in corporate roles, or maybe any role, when I set out to do this, I first of all spoke to my manager. She knows I'm very entrepreneurial. She also knows that, and this is something I've told her before, but I'm a big believer that doing more makes you more productive. And I don't think people who are like, oh, how do you have time to do that? I just want to sit on the couch at the end of the night. I'm like, if you sit on the couch at the end of the night, that's just going to make you like feel like you've got less time. So I keep myself active pretty often. So for me, like the routine, you know, I work, come home, you know, make dinner, kids, clean the kitchen, and once the housework and everything's done, then I'll like just budget an hour just to do bits and bobs as I need. And if I do touch it at work, it's only at lunchtime. But I've made my boss very aware that I'm doing it and involved in the process, so that it kind of keeps you accountable as well, because you have ideas through the day, but you know, like you can't work on them during your work day. So you can put them in a notepad. The only thing I do during the day in terms of work is I respond to every single comment or every single backer that jumps on. Because again, that's an algorithm tick. Pretty confident. But someone backs within, like, if possible, within 10 minutes to half an hour, I've sent them, hey, how you doing? Thanks for backing. And try to personalize it so it doesn't look like a robot. So that's the only thing I do during the day in terms of work.
Yeah, absolutely. But as you say, like, I think that's so critical in terms of, I guess it's having workers advocates, essentially, right? Or they might necessarily have to be advocates, but just make them aware that you are doing this thing. I'm really fortunate to have, you know, since I've started the whole Footy Future journey, to be pretty similar as well at my old workplace and where I work at the moment as well. They're fully supportive of it. At a company retreat last year, completely off the cuff, they got me to stand up in front of everybody and talk about what I do as a side hustle, as an illustration of creativity. It's like, man, guys, I just stuffed my face with food and I can't even string 2 sentences together. Like, a bit of warning might have been nice, but again, right, like, a lot of us who do this and who are involved in the community, like, it's somewhere between a passion project and a creative side hustle for us, right? So we have to make it work, but it can't be at the expense of what's putting food on the table. And I think that's a really important point as well, right? That once you start, you need to be able to find the time and still have the energy that the benefit outweighs the cost, but it can't come at the expense of ultimately, the main money earner. Otherwise, you know, we might find ourselves with a bit of extra time on our hands, maybe, which isn't the desired effects.
No, totally. Yeah,
absolutely. And you mentioned before as well, Curtis, how you've got eight different ideas or 8 games that you want writers' characters to kind of link through. So, walk us through, after Go RPG funds, what's the next steps and journey going to look like after that?
So I don't have all of the games mapped out. I just have the legends and their worlds. So the games, no. I do have the next one, which is a bigger one, and one that may not even be the next one, because anybody who's starting out, like, for the first time, if I was to start again, I would actually start with a Kickstarter that was purely P&P, print and play.
Okay. Yeah.
Because it would give you a really,
is that in particular? Yeah.
It'd give you a really good understanding of how Kickstarter works. There are no overheads. And I've seen a couple really good P&Ps on Kickstarter at the moment, which are like, literally they have $1 funding goals. And because there's no overheads. And you can do that with the P&P one, because you don't have to worry about algorithms. It's really just to do 2 things: build your brand and give you a taste for how this works. And then on your next one, you can then you can build it up. Plus, once just because you've P&P'd it on Kickstarter doesn't mean that you can't produce it later. One quick point on P&P, sorry, before I forget, because so many people are like, you shouldn't print and play because people will steal your game. I'm a big believer that print and play is nothing but free advertising, because I guarantee you that anybody who's stealing print and play games and printing them, they were never going to buy your game anyway, right? Like, as if they were going to buy your game. But what they do is they're playing it with people who are like, I love the game, but I can't be stuffed like cutting this out and crimping all the corners, you know, and then sleeving them all. Like, where can I buy this for $30? So they go and buy the game. So people, if you're afraid of P&P and like people stealing it, don't be afraid, because it's just free advertising. Start off with P&P. That's how I would suggest it. So the next game I've got though is so after that, go a simple cards games, because manufacturing super cheap, shipping's never cheap but cheaper. And then from there, you've had experience with Kickstarter, you've had experience with manufacturers. So the next game I'm doing is called Koa, and it's a board game, but it's has essentially all like, I haven't actually got I've got the original models here, but it's a cave building game. I'm probably actually going to change.
Nice. Yeah.
So it's actually, you're kind of like exploring through a cavern, but with actual pieces of cavern. And, you've got to try to find water and food and some other things, which have got names based on the backstory of the writer game. And it's kind of works like, is it Blockers? I don't know if you've ever played Blockers.
I've heard of it, but I haven't played it.
So it's like with the coloured little squares. So everyone starts in their corners and works their way in. It's kind of map control and how many you can get, plus the resources you can capture. But you can take over other people's locations. So that's that one's in development, but the cost of manufacturing that is a lot more. So I can't do a $500 starting with that one. I need to come in with the crowd. And so the purpose of this one and my previous one is I'm actually now starting to build a crowd of people that see my brand and understand me. So Co is probably about 1 or 2 additional games off before it comes. Because I don't intend on just injecting $20 into $20K into marketing to make sure it goes. I just want to go organically. Yeah. So and then the other ones I've got ideas, but I haven't like Co is pretty much ready to go. Just manufacturing I need to sort out and some minor tweaks. I've already had it like test copy done and through resin printing, but the other ones they've still got a ways to go.
Yeah, okay. And going back to one of the earlier themes as well, that like design and supply go hand in hand, and that almost supply is more important. Knowing there's a few more moving pieces to this one versus the cards that you're having printed in the US. Walk me through how you found that journey with getting kind of very bespoke board game parts manufactured in a cost-effective way that hopefully will mean that one day you can still spend 20 grand on marketing and the economics still stack up.
Well, the test versions of this I got all done by a mate who has a resin printer and 3 3D printers. So that was how I got all the test versions done. That's super cost effective. I just bought him resin and filament, and he also has a laser wood cutter. So he cut out a wood board for me, and he made it very easy. But it's not a dissimilar process. It's just the way that the manufacturing works. I've looked into it in China. It works off molding rather than like printing. So you just have to get the molds done. And once it's just the molds are super expensive. Once you've got a mold though, then they just reuse it. So and I've got a couple of suppliers for that, and so I know roughly where I'm going to have to sit from a production cost and how much I'm going to have to sit at. But it's why some people can't. It's like Keith's game. He because of the amount of components, it's a really involved in depth game. He couldn't probably go for, I'm speculating here, but he couldn't go for less than the 14K, and it's too risky to go 5 grand, because if you do that, you can't distribute it to people. Yeah. So absolutely. So that's why you should start off with cards and the basic components.
Yeah, absolutely.
This next one I've got. Yeah. Next one I'm doing now. This Go RPG one. It's in a box, which costs a lot of more. But there's actually 4 decks of cards, which are each in their own tuck box. There's 8 meeples, and there's like acrylic, 50 acrylic squares. So it has a lot more kit in it. But even just those types of components, because they're standard-ish, they're quite cheap in comparison to when you start doing stuff like what Keith was doing, or this color game. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, like the key headline or so what there is, for a lot of us who do one project and we get a bit of a taste of it, or there always is a pipeline. Think really strategically about what the pipeline looks like. Don't just go all in straight away when you don't have an understanding of Kickstarter, you don't know how the algorithms work, don't know the optimal amount to fund to raise enough money to distribute, versus no, you actually need to raise more money because there's more components to it. So I think really methodically about hey, if you've got 3 or 4 different ideas, like how do I actually set this up for success in the long run? Even so much so, like you invested the profits you made from Ryder into Go RPG, right? Like, that's a classic case of like using your retained profits to expand in a way that is controlling your risk and increasing the overall profitability of your venture long term. So
Yeah,
a very systematic way to do it.
Yeah, well, thanks.
Yeah. Well, I guess maybe before we wrap up, 'cause we've been going for about 45 minutes, which is absolutely flown by. But yeah, did you maybe have a question for me or a question for the community that you'd like me to pass on to the next guest at all as well?
So I've got one for you, and
Yeah.
this might seem like paid advertisement, but I was curious because you've got a name now, and I had a look to see if podcasts existed for, and I wasn't sure if you were going for this format, which is a VOD, or you're going to turn these into podcasts. So the first question I've got is this the format, or are you going to be utilizing this and turning it into podcasts?
Yeah, a great question, both. So unfortunately, I don't think I've got around converting Kickstarter into a sound file just yet. But yeah, I paid my $15 membership on PodServe or whatever it is to also have it up on there as well. So yeah, we can access it via podcast and then also just sound on YouTube as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, because I had a look for your podcast and I came across Boarderline Games, but spelt Boarderline normally games. I was like, but it didn't look like it looked like it had one hit, like it looked quite small.
Okay.
But it came up in Google, so I was like, is it? Oh no, this is spelled incorrectly. It should be spelled like board game, right? So yeah, that was curious. And then my second question was, with the channel, are you going to have a sub channel, or are you going to change the name of Footy View to become?
Yeah, I think most certainly the latter. I think in true board game prototyping spirit, it was just chuck something out there and see how it resonates and iterate accordingly. But even so much so, I need my graphic designer to come up with a logo, which I haven't even briefed and just in yet. But then to completely pull it apart from Footy Food, because in time I'd just like Footy Food to be one part of my overall gaming package, I guess, as opposed to the identity that everything gets funneled through. So yeah, I've got a bit of work on my hands to work out how to best optimize that. But I'm kind of thinking, a Footy Feud can be more Footy Feud bespoke content. Then I'll have capture as well. That'll be more capture content, and I kind of see those audiences being very different. And then a borderline genius. It will be more the podcasty, and who knows, maybe consulting and whatnot going forward as well. So
yeah. Oh, very cool. Yeah, it is really interesting. I mean, this side of things, I think there's, particularly in Australia, there's a big gap for it. And like if you're a budding designer, or if you're wanting to get something up on Kickstarter, one of the things you're looking to do is get like game reviews, or to get like some type of airtime with people. And the amount of people that I reached out to and just got either nothing back, or they just wouldn't touch me because it was we only deal with the big boys, or you have to pay them $500 to $1,000 just to have a discussion, or just for them to have a look at your game. And whilst this isn't about promoting a game, it's a bit different. It still is giving like a voice to an Australian market, which I think there's a big gap for. So I'm really hoping for success. So looking forward to seeing the rebranding coming along.
Absolutely. No, thanks so much, Curtis. And I think, guys, just to kind of recap on the last 50 minutes, I think for me, a lot of great insight. So thanks for sharing, so raw and authentically your journey and what you've learned through it. But I think for me, it starts with the principles. I go back to the first story about Bang and that core insight of, I want a game that's strategic, but I don't want to be out in the first round and I have to sit around doing nothing for the next hour, right? So have your principles, know what you're going for, certainly test the crap out of it through the design process that you're getting the balance right. But again, know your why and don't deviate too far from that. From a Kickstarter perspective, know the difference between what your minimum is and what your objective is. They're two different things. Me naively, I would have thought that the numbers there would be pretty similar, but knowing that there was a 10x difference between your minimum and your objective. Yes, you have to understand the economics between the two of them, how many can I print and what's my cost of shipping, what's my cost per each, etc. But know the differences really well between them. That then kind of allows you to try and game the system as best as possible, right? And now I think that funnels really nicely into the third one, which is the options for pledges. Great examples there of the VIP packages, and some of them can be fluff, but some of them can be super meaningful. That literally, it's $250 worth of value for 500 granted, but there's still $250 worth of cost associated with that number one tier, right? So it gives people options, the idea of VIP. People like feeling like a VIP, right? And having their own artwork feature on cards and stuff like that. So that's really key. And so many others I could probably draw from as well. But I think just the design and supply go hand in hand, I think is another critical one as well. And while many of us are doing this to start off with as an outlet for creativity, like if we don't know how it's going to get supplied, then it won't get made and it will just remain an idea. So yeah, heaps of gold in there.
Oh, thanks, man.
Cool. Well, yeah, thanks again, everybody, for listening. Yeah, 5 episodes down now. A new channel will come soon with proper branding, as Curtis has highlighted. But yeah, as per usual, any comments, feedback, builds, yeah, we're trying to extend the community here and give back to the community. So feedback, more than welcome. See you next time.